The ancient but still potent concept in the Catholic Church of excommunication is something that, well, it still exists and it has surfaced in modern British political life with the striking case of Chris Coglin. This controversy isn't just about personal belief, it raises profound questions about religious discipline, political conscience, and the proper relationship between faith and public life. Excommunication is not expulsion from the Catholic Church, but a penalty that cuts a person off from the sacraments, including Holy Communion. And the excommunicated person remains a Catholic, but in a broken relationship with the Church. Canon law defines it in both medicinal and corrective terms. Its purpose is not vengeance, but to shock the offender into recognizing grave wrongdoing, encouraging repentance and reconciliation. It exists in two forms. The latae sententiae, which is occurred automatically when certain acts are committed. For example, procuring an abortion carries the penalty under Canon 1398, and ferende sententiae, the excommunication which is imposed formally after a canonical process. And what the Chris Coglin case seems to be is somewhere between the two. The effects include being barred from receiving the Eucharist or holding church office. It's serious, public when declared, and meant to underline that the Church cannot endorse certain actions. So turning to this current case that's reignited debate about excommunication and church discipline, Chris Coglin is the Liberal MP for Dorking and Hawley, and in June 2025 he voted for the UK's terminally ill adults end of life bill, which would legalise assisted dying for people with 6 months or less to live. Before the vote, his parish priest, Father Ian Vane of St Joseph's in Dorking, wrote to him warning that if he supported the bill, he would be an obstinate public sinner and would be denied Holy Communion. Vane cited canon law, which says that those obstinately persevering in manifest grave sin are not to be admitted to communion. And after the vote, which passed the Commons narrowly, Father Vane publicly announced at multiple masses that he would refuse Mr Coglin communion. Coglin, who didn't attend those services but was informed by parishioners, described this as humiliating and inappropriate. He said it sought to coerce his vote, undermine the democratic process, and disrespected his constituents. The Diocese of Arundel and Brighton, led by Bishop Richard Moth, acknowledged the complexity of the situation. Bishop Moth had indeed urged parishioners to oppose the bill and to write to MPs privately. But after the controversy, he offered to meet Coglin personally, suggesting that public denial of communion was the priest's initiative rather than diocesan policy, and the Church's opposition to euthanasia is unequivocal. It regards assisted suicide as a direct attack on the sanctity of life, morally impermissible in all circumstances. The Catechism says, whatever its motives and means, direct euthanasia consists in putting an end to the lives of handicapped, sick or dying persons. It is morally unacceptable. Yet the Church also prefers pastoral discretion, and in many cases bishops encourage private dialogue over public sanction to avoid scandal, division and political weaponisation of the Eucharist. This is not the first time the Church authorities have clashed with politicians over moral legislation. In England in 2014, Bishop Philip Egan of Portsmouth suggested that MPs who supported same-sex marriage should not receive communion, and his remarks provoked a public backlash. The Bishops' Conference swiftly clarified there were no plans to deny communion to such MPs. Elsewhere, notably in the United States, debates have centred on Catholic politicians who support abortion rights. Speaker Nancy Pelosi was barred from communion in San Francisco for her public stance, and President Biden has faced calls for similar sanctions. Yet, there have been no formal excommunication decrees, just pastoral measures limiting sacramental access. And the Church maintains that politicians risk excommunication latae sententiae if they formally cooperate in grave moral evil, such as abortion, but enforcement is cautious. And I don't quite understand how, if excommunication is supposed to encourage the sinner to think and then recant, how that recanting is possible. The Vatican itself warns against using communion as a political weapon. The Chris Coglin episode underscores the fragile balance between conscience, pastoral care, and church discipline, and excommunication remains part of the Church's law, intended as a last resort to defend truth and prompt conversion. Yet its public or political use can breed scandal, division, and misunderstanding. The Church teaches that the Eucharist is the source and the summit of Christian life, not a prize for the perfect, but medicine for the weak. But it cannot be given indiscriminately when grave public sin causes scandal. Ultimately, this controversy challenges Catholics to reflect on the relationship between public faith and public duty, between private faith and public duty, the nature of conscience, and the Church's role in an increasingly secular and pluralist society. I think in this instance the Church is gravely wrong. I think the local parish priest is gravely wrong. This is a matter for the MP and his confessor. It's not a matter for public record, and it's certainly not a matter to be used as some sort of political tool. And I also think that that one has to consider what the law is for. The law is there to prevent abuse and to ensure that there is opportunity. The opportunity for euthanasia exists by relying on other states. The important thing now is that loved ones are not prosecuted for carrying out or for assisting in the last wishes of their sick relatives or friends. And I think it's wrong to nod and wink to the idea of a law you don't like by letting another country do it. I think we need to be grown up about this. And while I personally don't like the idea of the assisted dying bill, I think that the first thing that should be done is to ensure that people who help others travel to Switzerland should no longer be prosecuted. That is a first stage. The second stage about where and how we offer assisted dying, I think, is not addressed by this law. I think this law is very poor, but I think it probably will go through, and that perhaps is regrettable, because it means that it's going through without sufficient examination and without sufficient merit. I don't think there will be an opportunity to debate this in detail again, and that is the sadness. But had I been in the House of Commons, I probably would have voted in favour, given the constraints. Though, as I say, I don't agree with assisted suicide. But I think in this instance, we cannot turn a blind eye to the fact that it exists elsewhere, and that people will seek it, and A, they shouldn't be punished for doing so, and B, we shouldn't rely on other countries to do our bidding.